Tuesday for regular meeting of March the 9th of council. So any additions or deletions to the agenda? Councillor Savage.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'd like to add one item. And I think it should be very early on in the meeting. And that is videoing of council meetings.
Okay. Okay. Where do we want to put it?
Maybe after the minutes.
You can do that.
Between 2 and 3. Okay.
Yeah. So if we do it after approval of the minutes.
Thank you.
Any other additions or deletions? Hearing none, we have a motion to approve as amended. Councillor Savage, second by Councillor Negre. Discussion. Hearing none, all those in favor? Opposed? Motion carried. Approval of the minutes, February the 23rd, 2015. As presented or as amended?
As presented.
Councillor Hain, seconded by Councillor Colson. Discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor? Opposed? Motion carried. Councillor Savage.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I'd like us to have a discussion about this videoing of council meetings. In particular, I'd like to move that videoing of council meetings be terminated as of this moment until council develop a policy on the issue of communication.
Do we have a seconder for that?
I'll second it.
Seconded by Councillor Mulvey. Discussion. Councillor Savage.
Yeah, we had at our strategic planning session, we had a topic there that we talked about, and I think there was strong agreement that we should establish some sort of a communication strategy or policy. And there was some people offered to help us do that. In the meantime, I'm very concerned that videos of the council meetings prepared by Councillor Colson with his equipment are apparently on YouTube. I find that unacceptable. So I could reiterate my comments. I move that the videoing of council meetings be terminated until such time as there is a council policy on the issue of communication.
Okay, further discussion. Councillor Mulvey.
I seconded the motion, so it's clear that I share Councillor Savage's concern. I'm entirely in favor of having the meetings videotaped and posted on the internet, but I think that having it done through the YouTube account of a particular council member is not a good idea. YouTube is fraught with perils. The material is not being controlled. There's no control of things that are being posted, and in addition, I think it's, there's certain components of it that any kind of formal communication from the district, whether it's our council meetings or anything else, should come from the official source of the district. We're often reminded that council meetings don't belong to the mayor and they don't belong to a particular member of council, but they belong to all of council as a collective. And I was a bit taken aback when I saw that, without permission, that Councillor Colson had taken the initiative, as some would call it, to post things on YouTube without even talking to council members. And I think it undermines some of the principles of respect that are in our mission statements. And again, although I really hope that this spurs us along to get the meetings appropriately videotaped and on the internet so that they're accessible to more people, I think that we should do that through official channels.
Further discussion. Councillor Colson.
So I'm curious to know what's unacceptable about it, and also the statement fraught with perils. This is a public meeting. A resident could come in, could record the meeting, and do with that video what they so choose. So I'm a councillor, I'm also a resident. So I posted on YouTube. Someone's going to hack my YouTube account and do something with the public information video. So I really don't understand what the risk of doing that in that regard. Before posting it on YouTube, I was asked by Councillor Milbank to distribute the videos, and to which I agreed, but they are quite sizable and they're not emailable. And so I used YouTube because it's a good way to get large file information out there. Prior to doing so, I did read up the Freedom of Information and Privacy Act, and it speaks to personal information being controlled. But they also define personal information as being information about an identifiable individual other than contact information. So the only information we actually record of residents here, other than council and staff, we get their name and their street number. All that's considered contact information. So I didn't see a breach in terms of FIFA. So that's why I ended up posting them to YouTube.
Councillor Hain and then Trudy.
Well, this topic was discussed quite a bit at the strategic planning session, and there was support, I think unanimous support by council. We did talk about it here, and we supported it. The feedback I've been getting from the residents has been very positive. I don't think whether council or staff do it or Councillor Coulson does it, the same product is going to end up on the internet. It just makes it accessible to the residents, and to be honest, I see Councillor Coulson actually assisting staff with their workload by doing this. He's helping to speed the process along. So again, it's all public information. I don't see what the issue is. You know, anything to do with in-camera or sensitive information, there's no taping of that. So why would we discourage the streaming of these meetings?
Ms. Coates?
I just want to add some clarification. I realize that it may have been misinterpreted that at the top of the council agendas it says this meeting may be recorded. And it's common wording that's used on municipal agendas, but it's not to grant permission to others to record. It's to inform those people attending the meeting that it may be recorded. Now, many municipalities now have gone to a larger description. It's on their website, it's at the top of their agendas, and it actually talks about the manner in which it's recorded, by whom it's recorded, and where it's available and when. So that people know if it's going to be video or audio, is it into the website, you know, how do they access it, and how long is it going to get there for. So that's part of the duty that we have to notify people. For some people coming in, you know, they're a bit hesitant about speaking in public, and it makes a difference to them if they've got a video recording or audio recording. So we have a duty to let them know. So as I say, it's standard practice in municipalities, best practice, that it would be on their website and on their agenda, and often it's actually posted at the doorway as you come into the meeting, so that anybody coming in and joining the meeting would be aware of that. The provincial policy on social media does include a little description of things like doing video, and that if you're going to be putting video out, this is for their own employees, their own employees. If they're going to be putting video out, that it needs to, anybody who's visible, it needs to be, they need to be informed. And that you should also do a privacy impact assessment, which is a standard form before we enter into any programs that we're, you know, the Commissioner's Office has recommended municipalities do. So I just wanted to speak to those points, and that generally, most municipalities, best practices, you would have a policy in place. Often the policies do include statements about corporate communications not going through an individual employee or an individual member of council, although I appreciate that it was intended to be helpful. But when you go to the site and then it clicks to a picture of one member of council, it's not the standard corporate messaging.
I didn't hear that picture.
Thank you.
Councillor Savage?
Thank you. Council may recall, those members on this council who were on the previous council, there was a videoing attempt several years ago, and it was shut down. And I think, you know, as I said earlier, I'm not opposed to videoing council meetings, but I think before we do that, we should go through an appropriate process to decide how it's going to be done, and it should be under the district's website, not under a personal council's website.
Further discussion? Just question for your own information. What was shut down on video feed?
4 years ago, there was, I think it was something to do with the urban gardening debate. Somebody came in with a camera and set up a camera. So,
I believe there was a Paul Manley, I believe he was allowed to tape.
I believe that was shut down.
Paul Manley was permitted and he asked permission. Nicole was asked to stop.
For myself, I was going to mention that in the past there have been tapes done in council in terms of it. This is an initiative that is no cost to the residents. It's initiatives of an individual. I do get worried with the words with no control over what is being posted. Question to Councillor Folsom: is there any editing that's done of the recording? So just
Well, sorry, I run it through a compression utility because the size is like 5 gigabytes. So I run it through a compression utility, and that's the only form of.
but that doesn't edit what's actually seen. It's just behind the scenes file size. That's right. Compression. You know, if it was a case that an individual was editing it, then there's certainly the ability for an individual to change the message in that respect as to what's going on, as opposed to showing completely with regards to what the outcome of various aspects of the meeting itself were. I can certainly understand staff's concern about putting out appropriate notices in that respect so that people know. Back at the time when Mr. Manley attempted to, or did videotape, my opinion at the time was there was nothing to prevent the individual from videotaping. So in that regard there, it's more of a permissive existing permission as opposed to withdrawal permission was my viewpoint at the time. The fraught with perils part, I agree with Councillor Colson. When it comes to things like YouTube and things like that, yes, it's directly available, but it is a public event. So in that regard, as much as it is council's meeting itself, the ability for residents to view the meeting and view the discussion just opens up additional opportunities. If at the time that council is or the district has the ability, both budgetary and time-wise, and that to do it, it might be a different aspect to it. But at this point, I personally don't see any challenges with it. Councillor Savage?
Thank you. But what's the problem with taking the time out here? I'm not saying I don't support video at any point. I'm saying let's take the time out, let's establish a policy, and move on from there.
I guess my question back to you is what's the harm?
Well, the harm is that it's not an official representation of the proceedings at a meeting. It should be under the district's website. That's my opinion.
Ms. Coates?
I was just going to mention that, certainly many municipalities have opened up municipal YouTube, and then it would be promoted and advertised YouTube/Lantzville. But they also have within their policy usually a statement talking about reproduction if someone goes to use that video for another purpose. And I'm not saying members of council, but I mean from the public. So they usually have like a statement saying that, it won't be reproduced, and yeah, there's a statement right there. So I'm reading from the City of New Westminster, and they grant permission to replay a webcast video of the proceeding for the meeting of the council meeting for use in schools and other purposes such as private study, research, criticism, review, or reporting purposes. But the material may not be purposely distorted or used for advertising, election campaigns, or any other political partisan activity. Any other commercial use or rebroadcast broadcast video requires the express written approval of the City of New Westminster. So that's the kind of additional protections or statements that are put in there. It's common with YouTube, and I haven't gone into look and see, how it's set up, but that it can be set up so that it's open for comments. And that's one of the major roles of municipalities when they're into social media, is that there's a staff person assigned to sort of monitor the comment that comes through. Not from
censoring things, but in the sense that we are very much subject to libel and defamation and other things in relation to FOI. If people make personal statements or generate some kind of discussion, we have a duty to monitor that and remove it. So, it's one of the cautions that we've given anyway, that's why they recommended the policies that's through in this.
Councillor Negri?
Thank you. So what I've heard tonight is basically, strong support amongst council members to have some sort of presentation of council proceedings in a recorded format offered for, I'll say, ready access to the public. However, I'm also hearing that there's certain discomfort amongst council with the approach and some possible venues for abuse that may be associated with the current approach of posting on YouTube. And I just can't help wondering if the most durable approach, to having that, bringing recorded council meetings to the public may be to just stop our current approach and come up with something council can live with as a whole, and then proceed from there.
Any further discussion? Okay. Hearing no further discussion, all those in favor?
We're sort of doing that.
Recorded votes requested. All those in favor of the motion? Councillor Savage, Councillor Negri, Councillor Milbank, opposed? Councillor Hain, Mayor Hain, Councillor Colson, motion is defeated.
Mr. Mayor, I have to consider whether I am going to continue this meeting.
Okay. Related to the recording itself, I make a motion to direct staff to incorporate appropriate notices with regards to the agendas, the website, and the meeting location, with regards to the fact that the meeting itself may be recorded either by the district or a resident. Effectively, if individuals can do it, then we should make people aware of that in that regard. So that's a motion to direct staff to do that. Second is that. Councillor Colson, discussion on the motion.
So just so I understand, so you're saying if a resident wants to tape before the meeting or videotape like they've done in the past, there's no opposition to that?
I personally don't have any opposition.
That's why we need a policy.
Any further discussion on that motion? Councillor Milbank.
I appreciate where you're trying to go with it, but I don't think that that's the root problem that's been raised, which is that you've got, a personal YouTube account being used as a venue for district meetings with very little control over how that information is being controlled and presented.
From my standpoint, it's a case that the recording itself still should go on. Staff has pointed out we should put appropriate notices so individuals are informed. Councillor Milbank?
It doesn't feel like the monitoring issue that
No,
was raised.
I realize that. I was just dealing with the notification side of things. Any further discussion on the motion? Hearing none, all those in favor? Opposed? Motion defeated. Anything further regarding the videotaping of meetings? Okay. Hearing none, go on to the presentations, delegations, and petitions. The first one, Dr. Paul Hasselback, Medical Health Officer, Central Vancouver Island, regarding the local health area profile and Iowa District 68, adding discussions of local implications.
Your Worship and members of council, nice to be able to join you, and for those of you returning, congratulations, and those that are faces that I'm not familiar with, welcome, and I am your medical health officer. I do try to come around to councils about once a year just to provide a bit of an update in terms of what information is available, what more do we know about the geographies over which we have a shared responsibility. I understand we had a few technical problems in the transfer of the file, so if this doesn't totally follow what's in front of you, I apologize, but it should be fairly close. As a reminder, the lowest geographic unit that we collect health information at is that of the local health area where Lantzville is incorporated within the local health area of Nanaimo. However, the school district extends from north part of Nanaimo right down to Ladysmith and has been able to obtain information at a smaller geographic area. And Lantzville is incorporated into the North Nanaimo portion of the school district. And that's really helpful because it provides us with smaller information. I actually think that part of Lantzville is a little bit on the separate side too. So we're getting information at different points, but at least up in that area. And you see how that's important as I provide some of the information to you. If I had to provide, and I have in the past, a single measure of the well-being of a population, it's probably these days using the terminology of life expectancy. And putting Nanaimo in the context of the remaining geographic areas on the island, the life expectancy in the Nanaimo area remains slightly below that of the island and BC as a whole. And that's for both genders. There's nothing exceptional here. Growth in life expectancy in the Nanaimo local health area has paralleled that of the island in BC for about 25 years and continues on an upward trajectory, suggesting we're all getting healthier, again, a bit of good news. BC Statistics tries to incorporate together a whole variety of different variables into a single measure, and perhaps you're going to become a bit more familiar with this one. It's a socioeconomic index that tries to put some contextualization to a variety of characterizations from which I share with you, from education through social structures in the family, through economic well-being, housing, and collected from often information which is available on an annual basis. So this may change depending on circumstances within an area. As I've noted to council before, data which is on that side, left as you're looking at the screen, is not as good as the island. The island is in, or in this case it's BC, is in 0, and data that's to the right means that it's better than the average. Okay, so in this instance, we're looking at Nanaimo being slightly less than the BC average. Certainly room for improvement overall. And as I stress again, Nanaimo includes the bulk of the population within the city of Nanaimo, but also areas within the regional district and the district of Lantzville. As you go into your 4-year term here, I'm going to put out a few challenges that you might want to consider to look at. The first is we have had plenty of discussions over the last couple of years in relationship to youth and youth strategies. There is no formal approach at this point in time, but certainly groups within the area, and they call themselves Greater Nanaimo area, have been talking about trying to develop a youth strategy, something that council might want to look at from a planning perspective and how that might fit into the activities of council. Likewise, there's a group out there that's actually now become quite active in the last few months relative to looking at poverty issues. Both of these may well be issues that council has a vested interest in, and hopefully they do have a vested interest in, and might be interested in contributing, not from a financial perspective, but from the support perspective. By the time I'm finished my presentation, you'll note some less than desirable educational outcomes and some opportunities for improvement within the school district. This is a council that I certainly would encourage might want to consider harmonizing with other councils on the island relative to clean air, tobacco control bylaws, particularly as we're seeing some progress on a provincial level, having a standard set of operating principles for all individuals, irrespective of where they are, would be helpful. I'm well aware that you've got a variety of drinking water quality improvement projects that are underway, projects being a very generic terminology, and I encourage you to complete those within your term. Likewise, there are some longer term issues relative to sewage that need to be addressed. I'm not sure they'll get addressed during the term, but they need to be planned for. Some of the data I'm going to be sharing with you represents comes from the National Household Survey. Overall response rate of the National Household Survey is in that 70 to 80% area. We're a little bit shorter on this side, but it's still somewhat useful. And unfortunately, the National Household Survey data do tend to bias against particular groups, which I've identified there. So sometimes it makes the data look better than it actually is. Your Worship.
On that underrepresentation, how does it compare to the other groups? Like it's underrepresented, but significantly?
Well, that's the thing that Stats Canada can't tell us at this point in time. And anyone who's listened to Statistics Canada releasing information, they put in this disclaimer saying that they have no idea on the quality of information and are quite concerned about the loss of the old long form, what used to be called the mandatory census. Okay. Response rates then were in the 93% range. Now we're looking at 70%. These groups may be underrepresented, which may actually give an underrepresentation of those in greatest need.
Okay, thank you.
Again, just as a reminder, we're able to provide a series of health statistics, and I've just picked almost randomly a couple here so that you're aware of what detail is available both in the local health area profiles. Those profiles aren't fully completed for 2014 yet, but they will be soon. I keep you assured. But I have been able to share with you some of the data from 2014. And again, to the right means that it's relatively good news, and most of the measures when it comes to our maternal child activity throughout the whole of the local health area of Nanaimo, or LHA 69, is quite positive and something to be celebrated. The one that's actually getting better in there is teen mothers, which is down at the second from the bottom. And again, that's a bit of a good news story to be shared. If we're looking more detailed at the National Household Survey, we're able to extract, in the census, we're able to extract information at a lower level. I think you should look at Nanaimo West and North Nanaimo in terms of the geographic boundaries here. Lone parent family distributions, that's certainly one of the challenges for the geographic zone as a total is the non-homogeneity or the heterogeneity in terms of family structures. So we've got such great disparities between short distances in terms of family structures. Also speaks to issues that are moving up on poverty, children living in poverty as well, and probably extends as well to our academic outcomes. This again is perhaps interpretable for Lantzville as a good news story that there's a relatively smaller percentage, equivalent to some of the best on the island when it comes to families with children that are being led by a lone parent. Not so good is the Nanaimo Ladysmith success rates on 6-year graduation. While our friends to the south in the Cowichan Valley took seriously the gap that existed in 2008 and have been closing that to the BC rates, which are provided in red on top. And Cowichan Valley is in blue. And the Nanaimo Ladysmith School District has remained fairly flat. Similar to some of our other school districts in the Central Island. So I'm not going to say that's just Nanaimo Ladysmith, I just haven't provided that information for you. And I think this is a challenge that school districts collectively are going to need to look at. And I said 69, it's 68. Relatively speaking, if we're looking at issues of economic well-being, we also know that we have some challenges collectively. They seem to be fairly stable. If we try to put Nanaimo in the context of the island, which is another way we can take a look at all this data, in red here you'll see Nanaimo just slightly higher than BC when it comes to the percentage of children less than 6 years living in low-income family settings. More notable here is that while that reflects pretty close to the island in British Columbia, what we have is such gross diversity and disparities between our best areas, which are in St. Suc and Victoria, through to those areas on the island. They're in the 10 to 15% range, up to those areas where over a third of our children are living in impoverished conditions. We can break that down and look at it now at a local level. And once again, North Nanaimo seems to look reasonably good, but we have other areas of the small geography around us where those rates of children living in poverty are 2 to 2.5 times greater than those areas that are thriving to a greater extent. My friend at the RCMP, who's the officer in charge, reminds me that we do continue to have a higher rate that require police intervention. The good news in this is that as the red represents the most recent year and the blue the previous years, the oldest years, it's actually getting better for many of our serious crimes. So we're actually starting to see an improvement in the overall crime rate in the local area, something that as a trend is worth celebrating. Those numbers are still fairly small, but they're headed in the right direction. I did want to flag for council, and while it doesn't have a lot of effect here in Lantzville, that Nanaimo has had a fair number of substance use overdose deaths in the last 18 months. It certainly came to the head with media attention last week, and I'm happy to answer any of the questions that you may have. The fact that there is product very close to here and substance that is in use by anyone who is using drugs is something that I think council should be aware of, and I think that all of us need to be looking at contributing to whatever those solutions may be. And as I approach the end here, and there's lots of data, I did want to celebrate one more thing with you. And the early development instrument is that measure of how well prepared are our children at the start of school. And while Nanaimo isn't doing exceptionally well compared to our colleagues across the island, the good news is between 2009 and 11 and 2012-13, which we call Wave 4 and Wave 5, the Nanaimo 68 area was one of the few areas that actually didn't see a poorer score, and higher numbers are poorer score than those that the previous years. And I apologize because I don't think you're looking at this particular graphic. We can look at that dispersion throughout the school district. And again, if you look up at North Nanaimo and West Nanaimo, have some of our lower scores on vulnerability. Low is good. That still means that 1 out of every 4 children coming to our schools at the start in kindergarten is not yet fully prepared to start school. And that's why I say that there might be value in looking at an overall youth strategy. Parts of the region of the school district are looking at rates that are getting closer to 45 and 50%. And once again, we're looking at that gross disparity over small geographic areas. And with that, Your Worship, members of council, thank you for the few minutes, and I'm happy to answer any questions about the presentation, some of the data, or if you just want to throw whatever you'd like at me, please do so.
Council members? Councilor Negro.
Thank you, through you. Just wondering about that unfortunate statistic about substance deaths. Could you tell us a little bit more about that, please?
What's occurred over the last short period of time is that there's one particular drug by the name of fentanyl. Fentanyl is a narcotic. It's in the same family as morphine and heroin, but it is significantly more potent, stronger. It's being mixed in with some of the rest of the drug supply. And someone who normally is consuming a product like heroin may assume that a certain amount will give them the reaction that they're looking for. When they have this far more potent drug incorporated in, it leads a higher probability of an overdose side effect, and that overdose means stopping breathing. And it is manageable if noticed at the site at that time. Unfortunately, far too often has occurred over the last 18 months is that has not been identified. And we've lost some of the younger people of our community as a result of this.
Are other communities seeing this drug show up as well?
It's showing up pretty well across the province. Having said that, there is no doubt that what we're seeing here in the small Nanaimo, greater Nanaimo area is in an excessive burden compared to everywhere else. even compared to our friends in Vancouver, we seem to have had far more of our share of tragedies.
Councillor Mulder?
With your stats on lone parent families, this is more of a data collection question. If you have children who are, you know, a week with dad and then a week with mom or some combination of that, is that one lone parent family or two lone parent families, or how do you measure that?
Thank you. Through your worship, Statistics Canada will give us a long set of business rules. That particular one, as long as there is only one parent in the family, okay, and even if it's in a shared situation, that would be a lone parent-led family. If there is another adult who is in one of those circumstances, okay, and like may not be a full marriage, and there's sharing of custody, I actually can't answer that question. It would be lone parent or joint. There's usually a primary person that's identified as having custody, but I'd have to go back to the Stats Can rules. It doesn't sound like there's been much of a challenge in terms of interpretation when I've been looking at this data.
I'm just thinking you could have one child and two lone parent families, which might.
It would still only be one family.
Okay.
Yes, I appreciate that, but it would only be one family. It's actually based on circumstances on one day. And so it would be where that child was located on that one day if you read your census form tightly enough.
Okay.
Councillor Wilson?
Question on the economic well-being graph. Noted it was a percentage variation from Island Health Rate. Curious what that benchmark is. See, like income assistance, minus 70, minus 80%.
Okay, so for any of these graphs, we would go back to the full local health area profile where you can actually look at the numbers specifically.
Okay.
So what has been done, for example, if we had a rate, and I'm just giving you a number of 3% of members of the community on the whole of the island on income assistance. If we're looking at something that is minus 100, it would be actually a doubling of that. It would be 6%. Okay.
Further questions? Just to follow up with regards to the drug overdose side of things. There was the publicity last week, some good articles in the paper, and they did specifically mention Vancouver denial in those articles. What is there with regards to the education and notification to the young people of that? I mean, we read the paper, our kids don't.
Yep. The communications that have been going out, and there has been some for quite some time. This is not a newly identified issue. Okay, it was first brought to my attention back in the fall of 2013, and there has been some things going on. If we look at the age range and the histories of those people who have succumbed to an overdose, we're not looking at the youth. We're looking at a younger population, but those that have been habituated mostly to utilization. We do need to have a better engagement with that population. There has been some, probably just not enough at this point. And we need to increase our communications. As it comes to the prevention of initiation of substance use, now we're talking about how do we look at that within the scholastic setting or other settings at any point, and we're not looking specifically at fentanyl adulterated product that's on the street. We're starting to look at the sort of entry drugs, whether that's ecstasy or even marijuana or even alcohol, and making sure that youth are better informed of what those risks are and concerns and how to make mature choices.
I guess my only challenge with that is that there's, from the youth that I've talked to about it, there's this perception that, you know, that alcohol and marijuana and ecstasy are not really all that dangerous. But when you read like the articles last week with regards to fentanyl, that kind of hitting home, basically somebody goes to sleep and just never wakes up. Respect there. So is that time need in the discussions with the youth that, you know, this leads to this, or is it explicitly don't do this with the hope that they don't go for it?
I probably stress, Your Worship, that it's not about an explicit don't do this. We know abstinence-based approaches are not terribly effective. So it's about healthier choices. The choices that are being made are substantively further along the habituation process. For the most part, at least that's the group that we're looking at here. We certainly hear about non-habitual use as being an issue in Vancouver and the party culture. That may not be the issue that we're grappling with. On the other hand, we probably do need to be getting a lot more information out, not just to the general public about the severity of the problem, but to our youth as well as to our user community, in the hopes that there might be some behavioral change. I think our big challenge is that we don't have any control over the quality and of the product that's being used, and that's something that we're not going to have control over, nor is it likely that we'll be able to make a significant impact on the quantity that's available. Okay, all enforcement challenges, and even the RCMP will keep reminding me if someone's gone off the streets, there'll be somebody else that comes in and takes that up.
I think they illustrated a bus that had 29,000 pills
Yeah.
in the Vancouver area, which is probably just a tiny piece.
Yep.
Which
Might have
slows
made
it
a
down.
difference for a short period of time.
Okay,
Yeah.
thank you. Any further questions, comments from council? Well, thank you very much for your presentation. I really appreciate it. Now, the staff got the whole one?
We'll sort it out
Okay.
and make sure that council
Okay,
gets.
thank you very much. Now maybe just, next item is for the end with regards to transportation or transit. And so we've got Daniel Pierce, and Wendy Edema. Wendy's presenting, we're just here as moral support for Daniel.
Thank you, Your Worship and Council. Yes, I'll be doing actually the presentation.
You don't want to start with that slow, I'm sure.
No, I never started with that.
Keep talking, I'll get you where you want to be.
Start with it.
Thank you very much. Yes, Your Worship and Mayor and Council. My name is Daniel Pierce. I'm the Acting General Manager of Transportation and Solid Waste for the Regional District of Nanaimo. And Wendy Edema is here to answer any questions. She's our Director of Finance. So if I stumble on any financial questions, she's the expert. Well, to get started, there's some pictures of our system as it works right now. And I'm going to be answering quite a few questions that came up at the March 9th, I believe, council meeting. So as I go through it, I'll give you an explanation about kind of the analysis, big versus small within our transit system, what the difference is, where we are within our kind of a long-range plan, give you a bit of an overview on that, and give you some of the higher-level finance discussion as well. So to start off, this is just to demonstrate just the route that currently operates right now in Lantzville, and also in part of Nanaimo. So Lantzville is actually tax requisition. It's based on the Southern Transit tax requisition bylaw number 1230. Basically what this actually equals is that there's a formula that's derived within the bylaw, and it equals 77% of the revenue hours. And basically transit's always functioning off of how many hours of service are on the road. So that's when we talk about revenue hours, actually how many hours of driving time around the road. Times by the 23% of the proportion of revenue kilometers. So again, when I'll go through the presentation, but by revenue kilometers, it means when the bus actually has a sign saying in service, number 10 Lantzville, that's what we're actually talking about, the total amount of kilometers and the revenue. Not when it says garage or another destination. The transit funding, I just want to give a brief overview of how it actually works before I go into the breakdown within Lantzville. Within the conventional side, which is the large 40-foot bus, BC Transit pays 46.69%, very specific amount. And the regional district or local government would pay 53.31%, and then we get any revenues offset within that 53%, and that actually offsets it as well. Within custom, it's a little bit different. BC Transit through the province actually pays a higher percentage, 66.69%, and then the regional district pays 33.31%, and again offsets, gets revenue to offset that as well. And some of the capital costs included within the transit system are cost shared with BC Transit. Not everything, but a lot of the building expansions or downtown exchange or anything like that. Within the tax requisition, Sorry, Your Worship, this is getting boring for you to be seeing all these numbers, but
It's okay.
part of the 2015 proposed Southern Transit tax requisition for Lantzville is actually going to be $111,000. This is set just over $7,000 lower than the original proposed 2015 budget amount. That's just due to operational reductions. We've been slowly making tweaks going through the budgeting process, trying to bring that amount down. So we're quite happy about that. Transit's requisition is quite interesting because it's always based on last year's. So when we talk about revenue hours and kilometers, because it's based, you need to have the complete year, we go back to last year's. So 2015 is based on 2014. And with that, for example, I put in a couple of variables within the tax requisition. So in March 2013, there was a transit expansion. BC Transit through the province works on a fiscal year, where we work on a calendar year through local governments. So we're always doing a conversion between the province's budget of, for example, 13-14 or 14-15 or 15-16. We do a conversion and try to fit it into the calendar year. So within here, we did a March 2013 expansion of about 161 hours, so fairly small. That was prorated for 2013, and then the rest was implemented full annual amount in 2014. The other thing that is a large variable is the handy dirt rides, and I'll go through that just where the ridership is and show you the difference between the years, as well as the RDN union agreement, if there's any changes within wages or anything would affect that. This slide, I don't want to actually concentrate on it too much. BC Transit ourselves did a long-range transit future plan called the 2014 RDN Transit Future Plan. What it basically looked at was a short-term, kind of next 0 to 5 years, medium range, 5 to 10 years, and then long range going up to 25 years. And this was a slide that, an image in the future plan, so it's actually older data, but it just gives you a proportion about where the routes, how many routes are within the system, how they operate. And we do operate the system all the way from Area A, which is in the southern part of the regional district, all the way up to Bowser, Deep Bay, Area H, 1 day a week. So our system is quite expansive. It does cover a large area within our region. So within the conventional 40-foot bus system, we've had a 6-month average rides per month of 1,851. What we've actually seen over the last number of years, we've actually been one of the better performing systems across BC Transit outside of Metro Vancouver. We've seen about an on average 5% increase per year, which is for transit and part of where our demographics are, how we're spread out over our region, where our population centers are, is actually quite good. The 2014 revenue hours was 1,482, so that would be the total hours, including what was expanded in March 2013, was 161 hours. And then the 2014 kilometers was 41,357. So again, that's actually what the tax requisition would be based on, those numbers from 2014. Within the handy dirt system, 2014 number annual trips was at 1,403, compared to 2013 at 1,295. So the interesting thing from here is the percentage of the tax requisition share that changed. It went from 2.49% to 2.66%. And within the handy dirt system, any ride that's actually generated within the area of Lantzville would be charged out as a ride. So for example, it can change and fluctuate quite dramatically. If we have a client that passes away, it can change if they're riding 3 or 4 days a week. Or if you have somebody that comes onto our list, maybe 2 or 3 people that end up going to the doctor a couple days a week in social shopping trips, that can change the ridership dramatically as well. The big bus versus small bus. So jumping straight into that discussion about why are buses running around empty? I still get asked that question. Sometimes I'll be standing in the grocery store and behind me I'll hear somebody say something about transit and I always kind of cringe and think, geez, I wish I always see buses, they're billboards, they're big, people notice them. I wish I kind of dealt with something that was really small on the road. And why don't we have smaller buses? And it's a really good question, and I'll break down about how we operate our system right now, what efficiencies we have in our system to date, and where we're going and how we can actually gain those efficiencies. So one of the big items is that where do you actually see a bus on the route changes dramatically about the ridership. If the bus is starting off the route, usually there's less riders on board. It usually gains ridership as it goes down a route, depending on the route. And then at the end of the route, usually there's not as many people too. There's sometimes a transfer to another bus, but if there's not a transfer, it's going to a set location. You might have seen actually everybody exit the bus. The other variable is that we operate on peak service times. So we actually tailor the system. We actually put more buses on the road in our peak times in the AM and PM, and we reduce them in the midday and then later in the evening as well. Our peak times currently right now are about 7:30 a.m. till about 9 a.m. and 3:30 p.m. till about 6 p.m. And that's when we actually do put the peak amount of buses on the road. Right now in our system, there's a term we use called interlining within transit and transportation industry. Interlining is basically means when one bus goes into another bus. So for example, the number 10 Lantzville might do a loop through Lantzville, and then when it reaches Woodgrove, it would actually turn into another bus. So we're not having to bring another bus from the exchange or the yard, bring another bus out and do a jig-jag. So buses throughout our system, no bus actually just does one route throughout the day. They all do an interlining mixed in between. So for the number 10, it usually turns into the number 15, just the way it's been scheduled, which then goes to university. One of the reasons that that's efficient is, again, we don't have to transfer the buses back and forth from the yard. But also riders that get on in Lantzville or throughout the route are now able to, instead of getting onto another bus, having to transfer, they can stay on the bus, it turns into the number 15 and get straight to VIU. So there's efficiencies actually within the ridership as well. So without getting too much into the big bus versus small bus, I wanted to just highlight what we actually have in our system. So that discussion about when to bring a bus back and forth within a route. So in the peak time, if you need to have a 40-foot bus because we have a bunch of students trying to get to school, well, you need a 40-foot bus. In the midday, if you needed a smaller bus and that bus had to come back to the garage, we would have to actually purchase a small bus, put that back out on the road. Sometimes you'd actually lose those efficiencies and then end up costing a community or the total regional district system more money. So within our total system right now, we have 25 2014 New Flyer compressed natural gas buses, the CNG buses that you see driving around that have the green backs. And then we have 21 1996-1980 New Flyer diesel buses. This is the other variable that within our system, we've actually worked really quite hard with BC Transit to get one consistent type of bus in our fleet. You can gain efficiencies outside of that. Even though one's CNG and one's diesel, the style of bus New Flyer still uses a lot of the same parts and pieces compared to going into a different type of bus. Additionally, the large buses can actually be amortized over a longer period. So they cost approximately $600,000, but they're amortized over a 13-year lifespan. And the older buses are actually amortized, they were amortized over 20 years. The small bus, it can only last, it has a lifespan of 5 years. The other big variable is that the seating capacity. So in the large bus, we're allowed standees legally. On a small bus, you're not. So that's a challenge of if you pull up to a stop and you have more than, say, 18 people to get into a seated small bus, you're leaving people behind and having to dispatch another vehicle. And some systems where they have that, ultimately the amount of buses on the road that the next bus is coming very quickly, say within the next 10, 15 minutes, it's not the end of the world. You know, you miss your bus, you think, oh, it's another 10 minutes. By the time that bus loaded up, maybe it's only 4 minutes now, and another bus is on the way. When you get into routes that are either half hour, hourly, or even 2 hours, it's just too long. If you miss your bus, you miss your entire trip, and you could miss your appointments, your schooling, your work, those variables, so it's very important. Now, the other thing I wanted to highlight is actually how it works within our fleet. BC Transit currently actually purchases all the buses across the province outside of TransLink. So there's basically TransLink and BC Transit as the provincial bodies within transportation. So they purchase the buses, and then we, in essence, pay a lease rate on them. It's called a debt service, but we don't really have the option of which bus we choose. They more tell us to some degree. It's a bit mutual, but not too much mutual. Mm-hmm. And then from there, we have to work it out. Right now, within BC Transit's choice of vehicles, they have the high-capacity double-decker, which we're thinking of implementing in Lantzville probably next year. Just one. I thought I'd say that at the end, make sure everybody was still. The heavy-duty, which is a 40-foot bus, traditional. And this gives some stats from the provincial aspect of giving it its lifespan, how many annual kilometers you can put on the bus based on maintenance packages, and all that comes into the efficiencies about how we actually manage that bus. Keep it on the road, making it the engine and the different components last. The next up is the medium duty. That is something that BC Transit doesn't have a lot of these medium duty buses. It's something newer to the industry. A lot of systems in Eastern Canada are starting to test them out. Niagara Falls, outside of Ottawa, are purchasing these. Actually, one of the image of it's called the New Flyer Midi. There's pros and cons to getting into just a smaller bus. They're still quite expensive. They're about 30 feet compared to 40 feet. They're still quite expensive, and BC Transit is trying to do a cost comparison right now to see, can a community actually get the value out of the smaller bus? This bus is actually the same image that shows right there is actually touring around the province, and we will be seeing it. I don't have a date set, but we'll be coming through our system, so you will be able to be notifying Mayor and Council that when it will actually come through and actually be put on the number 10 routes and be able to promote it to the public to see if they're happy with it. And then the light duty bus, which is called the RBOC bus, Cobra backwards for any car buffs. Kind of interesting. It's a Chevy chassis style bus. We call it, it's part of the Handiart system or custom system, but they also can be used as just a light duty bus. So they seat on average about 18 with some wheelchairs. And that is nice because the wheelchair configuration can change and that makes it more flexible in that sense. But again, it can't have any standees on this style of the low floor bus or the light duty bus. And again, one of the biggest challenges is that short lifespan. So when we did mainly overarching discuss that large bus versus small bus, we looked at where our service hours right now, how big are we, how many buses do we have, what are we doing? And as we grow and actually expand our system, we're going to be able to gain efficiencies of having kind of a two-tiered system, two types of buses, where we do have the large bus coming off the road on some routes in the midday and the small buses going out. And vice versa, those small buses might be actually being utilized within the Handiart system at certain times of the day, and we're able to do that cross-referencing of the buses. As it sits right now, we are going to be trying to do a test in Parksville in September 2015 is proposed to implement one of these small buses and just do the Parksville route, the Route 88. Part of that is the Route 88 right now has a decent amount of service level that we believe that the small bus, if somebody gets left behind, will be able to get around quick enough and be able to pick it up. And we also have another bus, the number 90, that goes through there that we would be able to, you know, as we're monitoring it closely, be able to cover it and see how the ridership's affecting it. The overview, so what it is, I just included a link. I also brought a couple of the executive summaries of our Guardian Future Plan. If anybody is interested from council to see the future plan, I'll leave those for your guys' reference. But you can, it is available for the public and everything online off the regional district website. And it really lays out where we're going in the next 5 years, 10 years, and long range. And it shows you quite aggressively how the regional district wants to achieve some of the goals within transportation and linked in with the communities around us, and making sure that we're moving forward, working in the health side of the things, working towards livable communities, cleaner air with the CNG buses, with getting more buses off the road. You know, a conventional bus can take approximately 70 people, especially at the peak times, off the road. And when you actually think of that, 70 people that, if we're not on that bus, all getting into a separate vehicle or even carpooling, that's a lot of wear and tear on the region as a whole. And that's actually one efficiency that we can include being the regional district, is that efficiency from Lantzville residents accessing services in Nanaimo and vice versa, going up to Parksville and Pollicum, and residents in Nanaimo as well accessing services throughout the region, and making sure that we have those linkages and taking those cars off the roadway and sharing that cost benefit to all communities. Thank you.
Questions from council, comments from council. Councilor Haynes.
Question. I would assume, looking at your fleet of buses, that the lighter duty buses are cheaper to run. Is that a fair assumption?
Yes, it is. So the smaller bus, just put this up here. The smaller bus style is approximately about just under $200,000 to purchase. So because it's amortized over 5 years, its monthly cost that we're paying is approximately about $35,000 compared to, on average, say $46,000. So that gives you a bit of a difference within that. Operating wise on fuel and maintenance side of things, it's because we have so many of the newer CNG buses, we're actually seeing a reduction in our total fleet maintenance costs. So it's right now, I feel it's a tough thing to say one's really a lot more expensive, but as it sits right now, the light duty buses are in our shop quite a lot compared to the large 40-foot buses, so these smaller buses. That also costs more money, so they are cheaper to operate on the road as a little bit, but over its lifespan, because again, if you have to dispatch 2 buses or keep an additional bus in their fleet just to put out at certain times, then it actually tiers it so it's more expensive. So if it's equal, you don't actually need a large bus, you're just putting a small bus on, yes, it would be cheaper, but not as much as people would actually think. It's not 50-50, it's actually closer to about 80%.
So just following up on that, and I get what you're saying when you interline into another run, but when you look at our stats, especially on the weekends, like we have almost very little ridership, and even North Nanaimo has very little ridership. you think we could go with a smaller bus, at least on the weekend, to get to Woodgrove and then have the bigger bus doing the bigger loops? Because I follow the bus just about every morning, and it's got most of the people going to work when I come to work, and there might be 4 people on there. There is just not at peak time very many people on buses in Lantzville. So I think that's what, trying to get our cost of our transit service down, because the cost per property is pretty high here, based on our ridership.
Through your worship, one of the biggest variables right now is just, again, looking at our weekday service levels compared to our weekday. So right now we operate at peak times really in the mornings and afternoons during the weekday. Saturdays it drops down, and Sundays even further, and then statutory holidays is the same as Sundays. Yes, it definitely makes sense to, when our ridership is lower, to utilize a smaller vehicle. It's that kind of challenge of figuring out, like right now, do we actually purchase additional small vehicles just to put out on the weekends on certain routes? Because on our analysis that we've done in the past, it wouldn't be cost effective, and BC Transit wouldn't be willing to cost share and do those buses with us. So it's that balance of making sure that we're actually getting that cost sharing with BC Transit on the vehicle. And then also, like I explained a little bit, but the choice of buses. Ideally, moving into the future, we'll see a bit more choice in the vehicles that we can choose from. And that can be actually tailored a little bit more to our community needs. And that's where I think the greatest efficiencies will be made. And then also the other variables, as we expand and the system grows as a whole across the region, we can make those actually a lot of sense in some of the smaller communities such as Qualicum, Parksville, and Lantzville, and even some of the electoral areas, utilizing smaller vehicles that tie into the larger system and those larger routes.
Councilor Moment.
I'm sure you're here because of the vote we did. So thank you for coming. I'm sure we all benefit from getting more information. One of the difficulties that I've had with the bus system, and there was a time when we had one car for a family of 4, and I still needed to get around with the kids. And I really tried. I really tried, because there wasn't much other option, and it was just completely unworkable. You know, I wasn't looking at commuting to work or anything of that nature, but it was not viable, and it was clear that at that time to me that the Lantzville route, although I appreciate that there is some coverage of Lantzville, which it felt like, and it still feels like a tag on to the other larger route, which has distorted the kind of service that we get in Lantzville, and I think it has to do with this concept of interlining, which I didn't appreciate the name before, but you could say that the Lantzville route with this large bus is essentially subsidizing the remainder of the route, because we don't need that large bus. We need a small one with more frequent service. So we have a commercial core which has a reasonable amount of activity, and I know that Lantzville residents would appreciate the opportunity to get on a small bus and do their business in Lantzville, as opposed to getting, on this massive, mostly empty bus, and then getting stranded at Woodgrove and having to transfer. And in any event, I think that there's certainly some. I would appreciate if you guys would put some thought into how you can make the route more suited to the needs of the residents of Lantzville, as opposed to, I appreciate you're looking at the system as a whole, and this may be the best for the system as a whole, but I don't think it's necessarily the best for the residents of Lantzville.
Through your worship, I actually think your comment is very true. We are looking at it as a regional, and sometimes that loses focus of just a specific area's need. That is one focus within the RDN future plan, is really to say, okay, how is the service operating right now, and then moving it forward in the future. So, for example, looking in just Lantzville, it would be a prime example to say, okay, as a system and as the community grows or wants more additional service, putting one additional, a small bus on and increasing the frequency. The challenge with that is, because if the bus is staying in Lantzville and just doing, say it's doing consistent hourly loops or half-hour loops, that your amount of service hours and kilometers do go up, and the amount of actually tax requisition would go up quite dramatically with that as well. So that's that struggle of balance in between that service level compared to, how does it work within the community. But the other additional thing is, as we grow and as we get these additional resources in our system of different style buses, those different options, ideally we'll be able to say, okay, we know those morning trips, we've got a bunch of VIU students, we've got to get out of Lantzville and we've got to get them to VIU. We can accommodate those on a large bus, we'll sweep through and pick those students up. And then maybe after that, a small bus would come onto the service and would actually do a more detailed community-style routing, not just staying on the major arterial or major roadways. So as our system is growing, we are focusing on doing those things. It just takes some time and working with BC Transit, making sure we're getting that matching funding and getting the resources in place.
Additional council questions, comments? I seem to recall at some point years ago seeing some stats with regards to density of households compared to what makes reasonable in the way of a bus system. So for example, below a certain amount, it doesn't make sense to have buses. As it goes higher, the frequency increases, whether it's once an hour or once every 15 minutes, that sort of thing. Do you recall what any of those numbers were?
Your Worship, the RDN Future Plan has some of that information directly in it. I can't remember the numbers off the top of my head exactly, but we usually do look at per capita and what the service level requires, and then from there, if a community wants additional service, that'd be the choice of the community. But in general, transit-friendly communities are tighter urban, urban density, tighter density, closer living units where it's accessible, and buses aren't having to go through 4 different roadways and community networks. They're going down one major arterial street. People come onto that route and they function. That's the most efficient form of moving people through transit. But there are different models too. So looking at the model of, okay, saying we want bus every 15 minutes, this is what you need for it, and there is different models for that. Then saying, okay, well, our community does have the per capita based on hectare, based off this. It is more of a rural setting maybe. And then saying, okay, we do want a bus that is more community focused, isn't going to be providing 15-minute service or even half-hour service. It's an hourly to 2-hourly route. We know we don't want anything larger than a 30-foot bus. That's the maximum we want, and that's how the service would be provided based on really the official community plan and the choice of the community.
Thank you. Councilor Negrete.
Thank you.
Councilor Wilson.
So my question is, what's the annual cost to operate a small bus versus a large bus? All things included, operating cost, amortization, the whole 9 times.
Through your worship, I don't have those numbers directly in front of me. We would be able to generate that by pulling it out. Every year we work with BC Transit and we get an annual operating agreement, and part of that annual operating agreement shows what we're paying debt service per bus, and then from there based off of a certain percentage of revenue kilometer, revenue hour. From that, I would be able to generate some number for that, a difference in comparison. And really what it does is, again, well, as you mentioned, bringing in that life cycle cost of 5 years, maintenance costs bringing into that compared to a traditional now, a large 40-foot bus over 13 years now. Correct?
Yeah, I thank you for being here, by the way, and appreciate you offering your information, but I think that particular piece of information might be particularly compelling in terms of getting us to vote for more taxes, essentially, because I think that's the one cost that the whole discussion seems to pivot around. You guys are saying little buses are way more expensive, and we're kind of thinking BS. So having that number would be really helpful. Of course. Thank you.
Councilor Wilson.
Right, I had a question on the ridership data. We're looking at average numbers here and just trying to extrapolate from the chart. It looks to be about 75 riders a day through weekday periods. Is there data available that looks at on a per day basis, so we get an idea of what the peak use is in the morning, the slack time, so to speak, and then peak at night? So I'm trying to take that 75 and boil it into
The little
heads on a bus. So
through your worship, yes, we can. Right now, a lot of the revenue or the ridership we're generating is through our electronic fare boxes. So as people come on and swipe the carts, so we can break it down by hour. It just takes a lot of time and the staff time to break it out and be able to kind of tally it in a way that format makes sense. And then from there, we are actually working with BC Transit, and on an annual basis are going to be bringing forward a stop-by-stop breakdown within key routes.
Right.
So that would be something that, especially within, for example, the Lantzville route, it would actually be good to see who's getting on and off at which location, and do we actually have the stops in the exact location. And right now, we don't have technology perfectly enacted to actually get that on and off the bus. So we would have to actually put a manual count on where we put a student or a different bum in a seat actually counting people getting on it.
Any further from council? Well, thank you very much for your presentation. In terms of it, some of the factors like the breakdown between custom transit and that, things that a lot of people don't think about, as it's there. In terms of our custom transit increase, it's about 7% in 2013, 2014, so part of the increase. Thank you, Anna. Thanks, Wendy. Okay, this is the correspondence. There's two items here. First one from the City of Fort Moody requesting support of the BC Municipalities Conference declaration of the right to a healthy environment resolution. Received by Councillor Hames, seconded by Councillor Nugent. Discussion? None. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carried. Second item regarding the Regional Growth Management Service Amendment Bylaw number 1553.03/2015. There's a resolution there. Recognizing we are participants within the regional growth strategy, basically some background. Gabriel Island is actually the planning function is done through the Islands Trust. Previously, they contributed basically on the same method as everybody else in terms of dollars. And basically, the RDN board is proposing to decrease their portion down to 50% of the regular amount, recognizing that the RGS does not actually apply to electoral area B because of the Island Trust. So what would council like to do? Okay, I'll do it. I move that the council of the District of Lantzville consent to the regional district of the Nanaimo board adopting regional growth management service amendment bylaw 1553.03/2015 and further instruct staff to notify the RDN accordingly. Second by Councillor Savage. Discussion? Councillor Colson?
Sorry, as a newbie, I haven't connected all these dots, so how does that impact us? Does the Island Trust, just connecting those three parts?
Basically, when it comes to the regional growth strategy function, there's a tax requisition for it. And it's allocated amongst the participants themselves. When it comes to electoral area B, which is Gabriel Island, previously they were allocated on the same basis as everybody else, as if they were a full participant. In actual fact, the regional growth strategy doesn't apply to it. So when it comes to amendments, changes, projects, et cetera, with regards to the regional growth strategy, they have no impact on the planning or how Gabriel itself develops, because that's under the Island Trust side of things. From my standpoint, looking at it theoretically, because it doesn't apply at all, they could request going down to zero. But they do see some value in the regional growth strategy throughout the region, and so they're willing to participate on a 50% basis, as opposed to what the other areas do. So in terms of effect on us, their portion isn't a huge portion of the requisition, but then it'll make it so that there's a little bit more spread through the rest of the district. Further discussion? None. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carried. Verbal updates. Councillor Savage.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm pleased to report that the City of Nanaimo finally established the committee and commission system, and Parks and Recreation Commission will resume at the end of this month. They've actually separated culture from the title, so it used to be Parks and Recreation and Culture, and they're now having culture as a separate. I don't know if it's a committee or a commission. But, that's happening. The second thing is that the City of Nanaimo Recreation Guide is out for March through September, and it will contribute significantly to the southern communities of recreation. And I encourage all our residents to pick up the guide and utilize the services as they can.
There's just a question with regards to that. If they've separated out culture, what about the financial side?
I'm hoping that'll be explained when we first meeting.
Because I mean, right now we have representation on the Parks and Rec Commission.
Yes.
If it's taken from the same pot of money which we contribute to, it would be interesting to have representation on it as well. Okay, keep us posted. Great.
Well, thank you.
Councillor Hain.
Just one item, the Minetown Day Committee is already starting to meet, organizing the Minetown Day event for this year. We're looking for some new, fresh ideas, so if anyone has any ideas that they want to bring to us, that would be appreciated, and we're always looking for members to assist with the planning and the committee.
Thank you. Councillor Coulson. Councillor Miller.
Mostly I've just been receiving a lot of questions from residents asking well, recently on two topics. I consistently get questions from residents asking about what's happening with water, and to that I generally say, I don't know. And then I have also been getting questions from residents asking about what this year's tax situation is going to look at, and what kind of relationship that's going to have to the delivery of services and that as well. I say, I don't know. So I'm looking forward to being able to put some meat on those bones and being able to get some more concrete answers.
Thank you. Councillor Negre.
Nothing to report other than I've been fielding questions and having discussions with residents over things.
For myself, last week we actually had a transit select committee meeting. There was a proposal to change part of the route that Lantzville feeds into, such that an individual who would be trying to go to Woodgrove, for example, would have to loop through a chunk of Nanaimo, actually down towards the Rutherford area, and then come back before they get to Woodgrove. In discussions with Daniel, who's headed out, they've put that portion, or he's proposing to put that portion of the route change on hold, recognizing that a lot of Lantzville residents, when they get on the bus, they're trying to head to Woodgrove, or for example, BIU students trying to head to Woodgrove to tie into the BIU system itself. It wouldn't have changed service directly within Lantzville. All the roads in that would have been the same, but it would have changed the time frame for people when they're headed out of Lantzville. So they said they proposed to put that portion on hold. It was to service part of the North Nanaimo area. In terms of it, planning for the next year, we look to see whether there's a way to rejig routes such that it still provided that coverage. But like I said, it doesn't change the actual service within Lantzville right now. So that's coming up at the meeting tomorrow night. The original motion was to propose a whole host of changes, including this one. Lantzville to be separately likely to be considered, recognizing the desire to keep the route as is for now. Beyond that, just in terms of the RDN budget side of things, I did have a discussion with the RDN board with regards to the tax increase, and some disappointment on my side, where the RDN board members have gone through a number of discussions on taxes, and still there doesn't appear to be a focus on residents. There appears to be a focus on projects, which I know serve residents, but in terms of residents' ability to pay, it seems to be lacking in terms of the discussion. So hoping to kind of, me and another board member hoping to kind of ramp that up, specifically for next year, recognizing the depth of the planning process so far. And that's it. Next item on to the March 2nd, 2015 Committee of the Whole meeting. First thing we have are the minutes themselves. Looking for a motion to approve. Councillor Negre. Thank you. Seconded by Councillor Coulson. Discussion. Councillor Salvador.
Well, my only concern with this is, this will affect the tax increase, which is coming out of general revenue. And I realize that we need training for the new fire engine, but so 9,720 out of the 1.25% tax increase that's been suggested.
So we're on the approval of the minutes themselves.
Sorry.
That's okay.
Sorry, I'm jumping.
That's all right. Any further? All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carried. Now we get into the recommendations.
Myself on the first one, please.
Thank you, Councillor Negre.
And we just need to state generally to the public for the meeting.
I move that council approve the grant made in the amount of $250 for the American Community Therapeutic Riding Association to assist in delivering a program that provides therapeutic riding opportunities for children, youth, and adults with physical and mental disabilities.
Hain, seconded by Councilor Colson. Discussion.
Just real brief, I support this, I think they do good work, and I think, for the, recognizing this is the third year for the grant, I think I'm comfortable with that.
Okay. Any further discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor? Opposed, motion carried. Next item, I made the council instruct staff to amend the financial plan to reflect the maximum and increase to the property tax levy of 1.24%. Oh, sorry, I should.
Oh, yeah.
Did you wave them down there, Tom? Yes. Sorry. Okay, so I move the council instruct staff to amend the financial plan to reflect the maximum increase in the property tax levy of 1.24%. Seconded by Councilor Colson. Discussion. Councilor Savage.
Yeah, I won't be supporting this. The last meeting of the committee of the whole, I did support it, but on reflection, I think it's premature. We've got some issues to solve yet, including the disbursement of the surplus funds from 2014. So I suggest it's premature to determine at this point.
Okay. Councilor Hain.
I believe the motion says to reflect a maximum increase of 1.2%. So I'm okay with that, given that we now know we have over a $200,000 surplus coming forward from 2014, which means we had a lot of tax dollars collected that didn't get spent. So there's a lot of money there that I think can deal with any of the tax issues. So I would hate to see the tax increase greater than 1.24%. If anything, I'm okay with it going lower, given that pot of money. And the year before that, the surplus was $100,000. So there's a lot of money coming forward year after year that's not being spent but is being taxed. So I'm comfortable with capping this out.
Further discussion. Councilor Moran.
I realize after the committee of the whole meeting, this doesn't take into account the fact that we're gonna have to budget for the change in the fire chief. So, we may be, I don't know exactly what the numbers are currently, I was sort of running them, but I think that this is probably going to be a challenge. I feel incredibly uncomfortable with taking surplus funds, some of which we know are already spoken for, and using them to subsidize operating costs. I mean, you could do it. You can take the surplus funds and use them to, in my view, artificially decrease what your operating costs would be. But it just means that you're going to have a larger jump in the future, and you're going to eventually have to make it up. And I'd rather keep a more stable tax level than have these kind of wild swings in taxation, because we're not appropriately managing our core budget and our operating funds. So, I mean, we may find a way to get it to 1.24, and I don't know what kind of budget I'm going to vote for at the end. I'm going to have to take a look at it, but there's a lot of variables that need to be taken into account that we just haven't had an opportunity to include yet, so I'll be voting against it.
Okay. Further discussion. Councilor Negri.
Thank you, yeah. So I like what I've heard on both sides, or all what's been put forward tonight on this motion. It does seem to me that 1.24 isn't a bad goal to be working towards in terms of a cap on taxation for this upcoming year. I do have to note that there is a substantial amount of surplus and carry forwards pending, and also there's some very, what seem to be some dormant reserves out there as well that maybe we're carrying a little bit too much flesh. That may or may not be the case. However, I think 1.24% doesn't seem to present an undue risk in terms of possibly putting us into the position of having to finance operating costs from surplus and carry forward, even just for 1 year. So I'm inclined to vote for that reason at this point.
Further discussion. Councilor Solomon.
Good question before the rule on that one too.
Councillor Hain?
I have to say this only because I have to. But I made the very point about funding staffing out of prior year surplus last year when we hired the planner, and I was the only one who opposed that. So,
Excuse me,
Hang on,
I
let her finish
I
first,
was
and then-
as well.
yeah, but this year you did support the
Excuse
planner
me,
anyway.
debate between the individuals.
So to fund ongoing operating costs out of surplus, out of prior year surplus, I totally agree, it's not appropriate. But given that there's still so much budgetary slack in this budget, that we can easily make it up, just like we did with reducing council convention costs. I think we can easily find dollars in the existing budget to pay for the new fire chief and and keep service level very high. So I think it's there, but the point that was raised, I totally agree with that, and that's why I voted against it last year.
Okay, Councillor Milbank, do you wish to?
Well, as stated, Councillor Hain has misstated my voting on the planner. I voted against it twice in the last council term. With respect to the surplus funds, one of the things that I've been thinking of is that I believe that we're behind in our contributions to the fire hall reserve for the purchase of the next fire truck. We had to borrow internally and take from future years fire trucks reserves. And I think that it probably might not be a bad idea to use some of that surplus in order to catch up, so that when we get to the next truck that needs to be replaced, which is, engine 5.
It'll be in 5 years.
Yeah, that we'll be on track for that, because I think as things currently stand, we're probably going to be short. So that's sort of where I'm leaning with respect to that.
Thank you. Further discussion? For myself, as the leader of the motion itself, my intention is not to use surplus for operating costs in the issue perform. Recognizing the surplus amounts effectively each and every year, I believe that there's efficiencies or savings in some of the line items within the budget itself, which is one of the reasons why it was interesting to see the detailed budget and financial results as opposed to more aggregated. I believe the 1.24%, which is made up of 0.5% for existing residents and 0.74% for new sources that are identified in terms of the non-market change and the change in taxation on Aspen Road. I think that it is completely doable within the budget itself. And so one of the reasons for the motion was to encourage council to address that, as, for example, some of the motions of last meeting had a case where we were cutting convention costs in order to identify and source funds for some of the special requests that were done. So, like I said, I do believe it's doable. Councillor Milbank?
Again, just so that there's clarity, we may get to 1.24%, and if that's possible, then that would be a good thing. The difficulty is with the additional amounts that I'm seeing, it's going to be challenging at this point. So far, with respect to the line items, I think I've voted for all of them. But for example, with respect to the conference budget, I see it as something of a false savings, because historically we have not spent all of it, so that goes into surplus. So there isn't actually necessarily an increase in savings or necessarily an increase in funds that are available for programs. It's just a matter of doing the game where you're moving around the dollars into different pots. So I'm interested to see how it turns out, and that's the reason for voting against it at this time.
Councillor Wilson?
I suspect that's what Councillor Hain was referring to as budgetary slack. If there's money targeted or planned for and it's not used, you got to be a little more targeted in your budgeting. But at our last committee of the whole meeting, we identified a bunch of motions that we're spending money on. I believe the one for council conventions was the only one we looked at for reduction. And we have the general ledger details in front of us, and we haven't had the opportunity yet to go through and question and scrutinize some of those items. And so there's still more work to be done in that regard. And I believe there is some savings there to quite handily accomplish this goal in front of us.
Councillor Negrete.
Thank you, yeah. I'll reiterate that I like the 1.24% as a goal. But I also acknowledge that there are a number of unknowns out there at this point. Certainly, I think there are strategies we can adopt in terms of cutting within operating costs as they've been presented and as we comprehend them. The fire chief position still is an unknown. I want council to be in a position of quiet contemplation of the budget, and not feel under pressure, just so we can make the appropriate, or apply the appropriate consideration to the matter. But I still think this is a worthy goal to have in front of us. So I move that we table this motion until the regularly scheduled council meeting following the next committee of the whole meeting.
Give a second for that motion. Second by Councillor Savage. All those in favor of the motion to table? Opposed? Motion defeated. So that passes.
I don't understand why we could table. That's why.
Doesn't matter. The other one is not for discussion. So we're back to the motion as it stands. In terms of the fire chief, for example, recognizing the time frame with respect to it, the effect on the 2015 budget year is going to be at maximum half a year in that regard. The dollar figure, not yet identified, but if we were to use some of the examples, for example, we have a part-time chief, the dollar figure would be somewhere in the range of about, say, $30,000 for that particular position. As Councillor Hain and Councillor Folsom has suggested, the ability to recognize savings within the budget, be it either actual cuts in existing expenditures, or alternatively is what we would call it targeted spending. Councillor Folsom referred to it as targeted spending. It's not a false savings. If it's in the budget, we're collecting taxes from the residents. If we're not spending it, it's ending up in the surplus. And so what I'm suggesting is that rather than taxing residents for items to end up in the surplus, tax the residents for specific items. And by putting an actual number to the collection of revenue, it does force people to work towards a goal as opposed to finding justifications to change goals. So I'm a believer in setting that goal. I believe we can work towards it. I have looked at the detail of the budget in terms of a line-by-line aspect there. And so I don't believe we'll have any problem at all hitting 1.24%, even with the challenges of things like the fire chief. Anything further on the motion? All
This was recorded.
okay, you want to record the vote? Okay, we do a recording vote. All those in favor of the motion? Councillor Hain, Mayor Hain, and Councillor Coulson. Opposed? Councillor Savage, Councillor Negrete, Councillor Milbank. Motion defeated. Okay, if there's nothing further on that, that gets us into the additional recommendations. First item with regards to the incorporating 9720 into the financial fund of the fire department special request.
I move that council instruct staff to incorporate 9,720 into the financial plan to fund the fire department's special request for an increase in training budget for new training on engine number 2, new pumper rescue truck from general revenue 1 ton.
Second by Councillor Negrete. Discussion? None. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carried.
I move the council instruct staff to incorporate funds into the financial plan to fund the special request to increase the hourly practice and call-out rates for Lantzville Fire Department by an amount tied to the annual BCCPI rate from general revenue ongoing.
Seconded. Seconded by Councillor Savage. Discussion? Hearing none. Oh, sorry, Councillor.
Just comment perhaps, depending on what economic theory you subscribe to these days, what if we get runaway inflation? Will we just match as is, or is there any kind of language we should put to, I don't want to say cap, but do be able to review that if the situation merits it?
Yeah, this is an establishment of an ongoing policy. It's asked to incorporate into the financial plan over the 5 years. It's open for review each year. Further discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor? Opposed, motion carried. Next item with regards to the fire hall building addition.
I'll move that council instruct staff to incorporate $16,300 into the financial plan to fund a special request for the fire hall building addition for storage from fire hall building capital reserve.
Second by Councilor Coulson. Discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor? Opposed, motion carried. Next item with regards to the thermal imaging cameras.
I move the council instruct staff to incorporate 22,000 into the financial plan to fund the fire department special request for 2 thermal imaging cameras from fire department equipment capital reserve.
Seconded by Councilor Negre. Discussion? None, all those in favor? Opposed, motion carried. Next item is the 3 iPads.
I'll move that council instruct staff to incorporate $3,512 into the financial plan to fund the fire department's special request for 3 iPads from general revenue, which is ongoing at one time.
Okay, we have a second by Councilor Coulson. Discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor? Opposed? Motion carried.
I move the council instruct staff to incorporate a 10,000 reduction to the council convention budget in the financial plan ongoing.
Second.
Second by Councilor Negre. Discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor? Opposed? Motion carried.
I move the council instruct staff to refer to the 2016 financial plan discussions, the 28,890 special requests to complete Huddlestone Park pathway.
Second by Councilor Savage. Discussion? Councilor Savage?
Yeah, I think it's good that we defer this till 2016. As I mentioned, that they really the whole meeting, the Legion have shown some interest in participating in that project. So.
Further discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor? Opposed? Motion carried. Next item on the transportation services special request to top up the winter road maintenance reserve. Councilor Savage?
The council instructs staff to, I move that council instructs staff to incorporate $5,000 into the financial plan to fund the transportation services special request to top up the winter road maintenance reserve.
Seconded by. I'll second it. Discussion. Councilor Negre.
Thank you. Yeah, with all due respect, I won't be supporting this. $5,000 in the context of the district budget is fairly small potatoes. I recognize that we do want to keep the roads in the most excellent shape during winter conditions. However, given some of the budget surpluses that seem to always be present, I think we could probably manage this amount of operation without putting it in the budget explicitly.
Okay. Further discussion? Hearing none. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion defeated.
I move that council instruct staff to incorporate 37,450 plus funds for power into the financial plan to fund the special request for Huddlestone Park washroom for development cost charges.
Second by Councilor Negre. Discussion? Councilor Savage.
Yeah, I support the issue. I don't support the source of funds. My research on development cost charges for parks indicates we've got $58,000 in the budget, and we've got somewhere 500 and something thousand into other funds for parks and rec. So I think that this item should be funded from park reserve, and just added to the next item, which is also supposed to be from reserve. We're actually going into a negative on the DCC if we support both.
I would change that.
Okay, let's deal with them one at a time here. Councilor Negre.
Yeah, thank you. Perhaps I'll say a question through you to staff on Councillor Savage's comment about these 2 items together exceeding our DCC account.
So just for clarification, your worship, there was a combination of two. We have just almost 59,000 in DCCs. Right now, the cost implications that are identified for Middlestone, respecting that the power hasn't been factored in yet, is showing 37,450. So there is some DCC funding currently left over to contribute to the next item that Councillor Savage referred to. Now, in all likelihood, it might use up all the DCCs on the Middlestone Park washing once we have factor in the power provision. We don't know that at this point.
Thank you.
Further discussion? Councillor Colson.
Yeah, on the second one there, I thought we had just went to the reserve on that one. That we had that very small discussion.
Recognizing we can do that with the next motion. We don't have to exactly adopt as coming forward from the committee. Councillor Savage?
Yeah, it just seems strange to me that we're going to draw down significantly the development cost charge fund when we've got lots of funds available in Park Reserve.
Councillor Mulvey?
I'm wondering if Councillor Savage is suggesting an amendment.
Yeah, it'll be my amendment that it be funded from Park Reserve.
Second by Councillor Mulvey. Discussion on the amendment. Councillor Colson.
What's the difference? ECCs versus reserves. There's surplus money that's sitting in the pot to be used. Right?
Questions for the staff?
Yeah.
I guess if there was a specific project on the DCC list that council, had in mind that was going to be, that maybe wouldn't be funded out of the Parks Reserve. I mean, they're not kind of exactly the same list perhaps. There are restrictions on each of them to some extent. So it would require a more detailed look at that to see if there was something on the DCC list that perhaps wouldn't be funded by the Parks Reserve that council would wish to consider holding those funds.
Just for clarification, wouldn't be or couldn't be?
Yeah, couldn't be,
Couldn't.
because the DCCs would be on the projects listed on the DCC listing, so.
But when it comes to the Park Reserve, what are our limitations on what that could be used for?
Yeah, there's a couple of different ones. There's the asset replacement reserve that would be more for assets, playground equipment and such. There's a parks development reserve that's a little more open in terms of
What can we use? Okay. Thank you. Councillor Negri.
Yeah, thanks. My understanding is, there is restrictions on both accounts. The DCCs may be a little bit more, DCC account may be being a little bit more challenging in terms of what it can fund. I just note, as far as I can see, it looks like, in many ways, they're similar, though they're just the dormant pots of money that are lurking up there in our accounts, and maybe we could be using them a bit better.
Any further discussion on the amendment? All those in favor of the amendment? Opposed? Was that in favor or sure? I don't favor. In favor?
Oh, no. Sorry.
Sorry, we do that again. In favor? Opposed? Motion carried. So now we're back to the original motion as amended. Any further discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor?
The original motion has been sorry.
Yes.
Okay.
So now it will be the
Funded from another source.
reserves. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carried. Okay, so now we're down to the second one with regards to the rotary playground equipment.
I move that council instruct staff to incorporate 37,000 into the financial plan to fund Parks and Recreation and Rotary Park playground equipment, funding from Parks and Recreation Asset Replacement Reserve, subject to the Parks and Rec Commission completing the implementation plan work referenced in the Parks and Recreation Commission February 10th, 2015 playground improvements report.
Second with that, second by Councillor Colson. Discussion. Councillor Savage.
So my same comments, I prefer that this be funded from reserves and not development cost charges.
I did.
Okay, she didn't mention the development cost charges.
The motion reads development cost
Yeah,
charges.
she adapted it when she read it.
Oh.
Yeah, so it would not come from development cost charges, it would come from the Parks and Recreation Asset Replacement Reserve.
Thank you.
Okay, any further discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor? Opposed, motion carried.
I move that council instruct staff to incorporate 39,000 into the financial plan to fund Parks and Recreation Rotary Park, Mountain Bike Skills Park, subject to the Parks and Recreation Commission completing the implementation plan, with reference in the Parks and Recreation Commission with February 10, 2015 playground improvements report.
Seconder for that? Councillor Savage, discussion? Councillor Milman.
Just to pass along, I was recently speaking to some young boys and I advised them of this project, and I can say that there are definitely some residents who are excited about the prospect of having Mount Lakes as part.
Okay, any further discussion?
Great project.
Hearing none, all those in favor? Opposed, motion carried. Gets us up to the Woodloch Trails.
I move that council, oh, sorry.
Present myself due to employment relationship with the province of BC South Island Natural Resources.
Thank you, Councillor Milman.
I move that council instructs staff to incorporate 9,000 into the financial plan to fund the Parks and Recreation Woodloch Trails from the Parks and Recreation carry forward amount.
Seconded by Councillor Savage, discussion. Hearing none, all those in favor? Opposed, motion carried. I'm sure we got it now. Okay, next item regarding Wilson Road.
I move that council instruct staff to incorporate 1,200 into the financial plan to fund Parks and Recreation Wilson Road Phase 1 from the Parks and Rec carry forward amount.
Seconded by Councillor Savage. Discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor? Opposed, motion carried. Next item regarding Parks. Oh, sorry, Councillor.
Presenting myself to you, the employment relationship with the province of BC South Island Natural Resources.
I move that council instruct staff to incorporate 2,000 into the financial plan to fund Parks and Recreation Parks interpretive signage from the Parks and Rec carry forward amount.
Seconded by Councillor Olson. Discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor? Opposed, motion carried. Okay, stairs are getting moved there. Okay, so with regards to the Alls Road Reservoir.
Question on this one, I thought we agreed to delay that one until discussion in September. The 6-month timeline we talked about. And we voted on that.
Correct.
Because we had a discussion on the /10 engineering and where we are with some of the strategic items that would impact the design. Just look at the notes and put the minutes there and page 17.
Yeah, I recall the discussion, Your Worship, and that we did indeed proceed with the motion.
Oh, we have it recorded.
I move that council instruct staff to incorporate $100,000 into the financial plan to fund special request, replace the Alls Road Reservoir from Waterworks Capital Reserve Gas Tax Strategic Initiatives.
Seconded? Seconded by Councillor Savage. Discussion. Just clarification from staff, when it's making reference to the gas tax strategic initiatives grants, are we talking already existing grants that we have sitting in reserves or a new application?
It was intended to be a new application.
Okay. So discussion on the motion. Councillor Negan.
Well, I support the motion. I made the motion after all. I think this is a needed and very important project. We're talking about a reservoir here that is integral to supplying the community's water. It is essentially crumbling. I'm a bit surprised that we haven't moved, council hasn't moved to initiate its replacement in the past. And I think, in essence, it's a strategic asset whose failure holds present a great deal of risk to the residents of the district. So I
I think we can't do enough to make sure this gets done expeditiously and efficiently.
Councillor Coulson, did you raise your hand earlier?
Yeah,
And
hand up
Councillor
too.
Savage.
Yeah. So I'm not in disagreement of replacing the reservoir. What I'm struggling with right now is it was identified that that would be a class 10 level of design. That's plus or minus 10%. We don't know where the reservoir is going to be at this time. We don't know how much water we'll be holding in it based on some of the other strategic discussions that have to happen with who's getting water, development, and so forth. So my opinion was that it's too early to be embarking on an engineering study. At this time, based on these unknowns, we're really at a feasibility study level. So I think it's premature to spend this money until council's had some of these other discussions to clarify the design parameters.
Councillor Savage?
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I was supporting, agree with Councillor Newgrave's comments. I've looked at this personally, and it's in tough shape. This thing is not in good shape, and it's about time that we started moving towards the replacement.
Councillor Milne?
I'm not an engineer, so I don't have the background that Councillor Coulson does in class 10 or any of the technical details. What's important to me at this stage is that we're taking steps to move this along, and putting it in the budgeting process is the first step. What that means in terms of the engineering specs, obviously that will become clear in time, but I'd like to get it going.
Councillor Newgrave?
Thank you. Yeah, just to expand a bit, I mean, we're putting $100,000 into the financial plan to begin the process on this. What that might look like in terms of the study, whether it be feasibility or going to more detailed engineering. I mean, the money's there, the options there. The discussion we had with staff about this the other night suggested they likely wouldn't be moving into implementation of spending money towards the project until September. So that gives some lead time to sort out some of the fine details. But I just want to stress, by doing this, by passing this motion, council is overtly supporting and taking steps to replace this reservoir. Think about what may happen if there's a slight little jiggle in the earth tomorrow and that thing comes tumbling down, after we just having defeated a motion to not to take steps to replace it. We look pretty damn foolish, in addition to likely being on the hook for some serious money to someone. Thank you.
Further discussion, Councillor Coulson?
Is this something we're able to table until we review the committee of the whole recording to see what we actually voted on at the time?
Well, the committee of the whole itself just brings forward to council itself. Council can do whatever they like here. We don't have to adhere to what was at the committee of the whole regardless. So in terms of the motion itself, well, let's just hypothetically say it doesn't really reflect what was specifically said at the committee of the whole. I'm not saying it doesn't, but if it didn't, it's still up to council to decide what to do. It's not binding on us in any way, shape, or form. Just question to staff on the motion itself. Should it actually read Waterworks Capital Reserve or Gas Tax Strategic Initiatives Grant?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. So just mover and seconder,
I think we'll take that as a friendly amendment.
there's a word missing there. And was part of my kind of confusion, which pot is it coming out of? And if it was just specifically saying the Strategic Initiatives Grant, I'd be really worried, because there's no guarantee that we'll get that. So as long as we've got the alternative way to pay for it, settles me down a little bit. Councillor Hain?
It's okay, you just answered my question.
Councillor Coulson?
So this $100,000, to speak through the staff, is that the amount for the entire engineering scope of work for the reservoir, or a subset, a component?
And to the chair, it would actually be probably the 85% of the cost of the total design for the reservoir. As stated prior, we don't know exactly what it's going to get yet, and once we have that information and options in place, we'll actually be coming back to council with those options for your decision on whether to move forward with design in certain areas or stuff like that. So staff will not be spending any money until further direction is given by council.
So none of this $100,000 will be spent until further direction comes back to council.
So it's
As far as the detailed design, getting the engineers to help us find different areas and whatnot, there's gonna be small amounts spent, I guess, basically on the specific engineering like that. But as far as the detailed design, that won't happen until there's a place we know where it's gonna go, so that we know how to design around that, the topographic area.
Right. We've already done a feasibility study, have we not, on potential locations. And has that changed, or?
We have done some looking around at different areas. There's one area in particular that kind of jumps out as the best area, but it's on private property, so we would have to be dealing with that property. There's a whole lot of different things we have to put forth prior to actually getting a detailed design. So therefore I say, yeah, we'll be spending a small amount on engineering to find out if it's feasible to go in that area, and then we'll come back to council to get direction on whether or not you want to specifically go in the area that we want. No monies will be spent on the detailed design until such time we know where it's going.
So you mentioned about 85% of the way there, so roughly 15 grand would be spent on a feasibility type process, and then.
It's hard to say. Basically, we gotta lay out a whole bunch of different things prior to that, and then try and meet those goals specifically, and then get back to council with options for direction.
Any further discussion on the motion?
Recorded vote, please, your worship.
Okay, so any further discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor? Councilor Negri, Councilor Novak, Councilor Hayden, Councilor Savage, Mayor Hayden. Opposed? Councilor Colson. Motion carried. Okay, so any further? Okay, gets us to unfinished business, draft council confidentiality and conflict policy. Now, technically, right now, there is a motion on the floor that was referred or postponed to this council meeting. So just as a bit of a housekeeping issue first, it's not a motion with regards to the actual policy itself. Just that the motion that's there, that's actually already on the floor, if we could have a motion to amend it to add the words as presented March the 9th, 2015, just so that everybody's aware of the version of the document itself. So Councilor Savage, seconded by Councilor Negri. Discussion on the amendment. Okay, hearing none, all those in favor? Opposed, motion carried. Okay, so now we're back to the original motion itself, which was adopt the council confidential and conflict policy as presented March the 9th, 2015. Councilor Novak.
I think that Lantzville is going to be at the front of the pack as far as this policy and the appendixes and the proposal that's in the package. Sets out a fairly specific game plan for dealing with potential in-camera breaches, and it sets out as well a fairly specific game plan for dealing with potential conflicts of interest. In the course of my employment life, among residents, this is one of those festering and nagging issues. I don't mean necessarily residents here, but residents in municipalities across BC, that undermines the ability of municipal governments to generate confidence in their decision making. So I really think that other municipalities are going to be looking to copy this, and I think that this is something that we should certainly be proud of. I have two small amendments, and I'll deal with them one at a time. Neither of them is substantive. First of all, I'd like to make an amendment to change all references to deputy mayor to acting mayor.
That's the motion?
Yep.
Okay, do a seconder for that?
I'll second it.
Second by Councilor Negri. Discussion?
It's not consistent with our procedure bylaw or our policy.
Any further discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor? Opposed, motion carried. Second one?
The second amendment is, I hope Trudy can follow along. It's slightly more complicated. If council members want to turn to page 23, this is appendix 1. So this is the form letter. It says in the form letter, just kind of gives some background to what's going on and what process will be. It goes hand in hand with the potential resolution that would follow. That's over the page at page 6. The motion says, whereas, and then you look at, whereas insert name has been afforded procedural fairness with respect to council's consideration of this matter, and in particular, insert name, was notified at least 7 days in advance, and then there's a list of the things that the person was notified of. In reviewing the letter at page 5, it does not refer to the content at sub B and sub D. So what I'm going to do is make an amendment to add in the words in sub B and D in between the second and third paragraph. It says, for example, the motion, again, just said, now that everybody knows where I am, the motion says that the person has been advised that council will be considering, this is at B, potential options for investigating or dealing with the alleged breach, including a select committee of council to inquire into the matter and to report its findings and opinion to the council, an independent investigator to advise council, referral to the RCMP under section 5 of the Offence Act, a warning for no action. It doesn't say that in the letter, which is supposedly advising the person. And similarly with D, it says that the person has been advised that council would be considering resolving whether or not to review copies of any emails or other records in issue in redacted form to protect personal information unrelated to the breach. Similarly, the letter over in appendix 1 doesn't provide that content. So I'd like to make an amendment to include please be advised, and then the language in sub B, that council will be considering potential options for investigating or dealing with the alleged breach, etc., etc. And then also the next paragraph, please be advised, and then repeat the language sub D, that council will be considering resolving whether or not to review copies, etc., etc. And to include those two paragraphs as I've articulated them between paragraphs 2 and 3 in the letter.
Okay, we second with that. Second by Councilor Newgrave. Discussion. Councilor Savage.
Yeah, I think anytime we get free legal advice, we should jump on it.
This is just wordsmithing.
I was not saying that.
Councilor Hayden.
I'd like to have seen it in writing so we can see what it is that we're changing. But I think once we get into discussing it further, there may be more changes anyway.
Any further discussion on the amendment? Hearing none, all those in favor? Opposed? Motion carried. Okay, further discussion on the motion as amended. Councilor Colson.
I've got some broad concerns with how it's presented. Not sure I can tackle them in coherent motions. So I'll state what I'm concerned about for it, and then possibly see if we can send this back to staff for rejigging. But as I read through this, there's kind of two key sections that they've spelled out. Allegation of a breach of confidentiality, which is appendix 1, and then there's the second set where a breach is believed to have been proven. So if we go into the language of it, on page 21 of our package, the first bullet there is ascertain the facts, the applicable legal rules. I'd like to see that spelled out a bit more. Ascertaining the facts, what does that look like? As I've read through this, I come away with a bit of an impression that there isn't a good level of process to prove innocence here. It's largely based on, it's out there, you're guilty, here's what we're doing about it. And so I would like to see some language in there where we spell out more internal processes where this is tried, where we try to resolve it before everyone lawyers up. So what would that look like? Well, first step, make sure that the accused has a reasonable opportunity to speak to the allegations. Second thing is on page
Yeah, sorry, Your
4.
Worship, if I could just interrupt for a minute. Because there's a number of documents that we're referring to now and we have the replacement, if council could refer their changes to the page numbers that are noted to the inserted ones that you were supposed to replace in the agenda package. Because the agenda package is numbered differently, and these pages, the ones that you were supposed to utilize for tonight, if you could refer to the page numbers that are noted at the top.
There were a couple of call more housekeeping changes that result in staff being an extra thing tonight. Just addition of words like we said breach before, it says breach of conflict, there's a confidentiality. So that formatting has resulted in some slight changes to what we things are on this.
So on page 4, there's reference to a standing committee, which appears to have some form of quasi-judicial authority there. I would like to see that spelled out as a step internally prior to moving to the other enforcement items there, notifying the media and so forth. So that's my big concern. We have language in here where the breach has not occurred, or there is an apprehension it is about to occur. So we're forecasting a breach, and on bullet 4 there of the list, we're asking the allegedly accused person to seek independent legal opinion. Doesn't seem right. You know, we make $766 a month at this gig, and that's used up in about 3 hours with a hefty municipal law firm. So I really struggle with how we've presented this. I think the intent is good, and as I'll rehash here, I think we need some more language to the internal processes before moving on.
Just clarification, staff, on this one that's got some yellow on it. There's on page 4 of this, there's a paragraph in the middle in yellow. I just glanced at it here. Is there a change?
That paragraph did not exist in the previous policy. That was included in their package. So that's why it's highlighted.
I'm looking at that paragraph right here in my package. On page 21 of the.
Yeah, I'm going there, sorry.
Okay, page 21 of the agenda.
Oh, you know what it is? That's
It's,
in the first section.
yeah, there's 2
Where
sections.
breach has not occurred,
Oh, that's
and it should be alleged to occur.
Oh, I see, okay,
So
on the chamber section, that's right, okay, thank you. Okay, further discussion. Councilor Melvin.
Yeah, I'm not on side with Councilor Fulton about his concerns. It remains an option, specifically spelled out that there be no action. So, I mean, if council determines that the whole thing is bogus, they don't have to do anything. That remains an option. With respect to advising somebody to consult a lawyer, that's for the district's protection. We receive specific advice from our legal counsel about the importance of procedural fairness. It's a person's option to consult a lawyer, and I think it protects the district to have it articulated that that's an option for somebody. It doesn't say they have to. It says expressly informed of their right to retain legal counsel. As I understood from the presentation, the option of it's not really an option to skip those procedural fairness components. Even if it might seem tempting, because that potentially puts the district at risk. So in my view, and I've looked at this in some detail, there's option. Basically, what I see is it's a flow chart which creates a myriad of options from taking some fairly serious action to to doing absolutely nothing. And it's up to council what they want to do. And I don't particularly want to prejudge that in any particular case. I want to leave all of those options available.
And I'm not suggesting we strip them, I'm suggesting we add to that flow chart to spell out more clearly what happens internally prior to moving to notifying people they should get a lawyer. Because in that very first section, it says where the breach has not occurred or there's an apprehension it is about to occur. So what is that? You know? So, but if nothing's happened, you're now absorbing costs to seek representation on an item you may not have even done. So I agree, steps need to be there. Like I said, need some additions to that flow chart before we start lowering that.
Councilor Newgrave.
Thank you. Well, first off, I want to express support for the concept of having such a policy. I think it's a major step forward, and I think it'll save a lot of, has the potential to save a fair bit of time, bother, and expense for this council, the district, and the taxpayers of Lantzville. I think one of the, as written and as amended, one of the key points worth noting that there is flexibility within this, and not undue constraint. It sets out general conditions of what may look like something, it may not, and how council may move. I think too, what is inherent in this is the concept of procedural fairness and natural justice. I believe our legal counsel, when we were discussing the matter with them, drafted the policy to reflect those principles. So with those inherent in the document itself, I think we run the risk of rendering it less effective by adding too much detail to it. There might be too much constraint to deal with specific with a circumstance that's not specifically named in the conditions or items that are added to the policy as the draft policy as it stands now.
Further discussion. For myself, in terms of it, some of the things procedural. First thing, question to staff. Objective of resolving the matter at the executive level. What does that mean? I'm going to find it in the new version. It's page 3 of the old one. Oh, it's on page, yeah, still on page 3. The second round bullet, if a breach of conflict rules or confidentiality is alleged to have occurred. It's got in the second bullet, third line down, refers to executive level.
I can confirm with legal counsel, but I suspect it might be reflected of the mayor and the corporate officer as identified in D. And that might be his reference, but I can clarify that.
Okay, thank you. Other parts, in terms of the just in that section, ascertain the facts, applicable legal rules, and communicate with the subject member with the objective of resolving the matter at the executive level. I guess I'm a little bit confused if there isn't involvement of an individual who's making allegations. At that point there, it's based on my reading of it, it's not necessarily counsel trying to resolve this at that point, recognizing the interpretation there at executive level. And so from that standpoint, to leave out an individual making allegations from that part of the process is wrong in my case, based on the looking at it. Similar to that, and I realize I'm kind of jumping around, the allegation of breach of confidentiality or conflict of interest. What form does that take? What details are required to be provided by an individual making an allegation? Is it just a general statement, I think they're doing something, and here's a bunch of documents? Or is there a specific form or format or explanations that they're required to provide prior to actually embarking into any sort of process, because, you know, in terms of members of the public, for example, could make an allegation that you know, just kind of off the cuff, and I hate to start heading down the road based on something that doesn't have evidence of or explanation of as to what the actual allegation itself is. Other parts, you know, way down, way down in the section, if the breach is alleged to have occurred, that's on page 4 of both versions. Attempt to resolve the matter without proceeding to the steps set out in section 7 of this policy. There's a whole bunch of things that we collectively maybe are doing, or individuals are doing, prior to reaching that, and I think that's a point that should be earlier in it, recognizing that the actual procedure itself brings in legal costs on both sides potentially. So in terms of we want to solve this, figure out one way or another, the amount of action earlier itself in the document. Again, specificity, endeavor to prevent, above that one, endeavor to prevent the member from further breaching confidentiality or conflict of interest laws. And I realize there's an attempt to be flexible here. Some sort of idea as to what that is and what that could potentially be is something that I'm concerned about, recognizing the generality of it. People could say, well, we're going to do this because we're endeavoring to prevent the member from further breaching. Having some sort of a scope to that and possibilities is important to it. Another part, indemnification or cost. If the district is recommending, encouraging individuals to seek an independent legal opinion, there's a cost associated with that. And if it's a case where council pursues something, or even the district through letter or whatever warns somebody of doing that, and then it's a result of an unfounded allegation, an unsupportable allegation, or even if the district chooses, just for whatever reason, not to pursue, whether or not there's a policy, portion of the policy that effectively makes it so that the district considers or does pay for the costs of the individual themselves. We have an indemnification policy as it stands right now that speaks to something similar to that. And in my opinion, there should be some aspect of that within the document itself. Other things, and I realize I'm just tossing stuff here. The Appendix 1. In regard to any council decisions, we will provide you with oral reasons for our decisions. To me, that's not good enough. To me, it has to be written in that regard. The interpretation of what's said orally versus the written word is quite different. The ability to clarify, especially under a stressful type of a situation, or even the thought to clarify, two parties leave the room and nobody's really sure what they said. People thought they said something, but in that respect, it's unsure. Last item, got others, but I'll kind of kick this last one here. Again, with that letter, we will attempt to reach a consensus as to whether to pursue the matter further. Why is that consensus? And in an ideal world, yes, consensus exists, but a consensus implies everybody agrees. There's a motive, in some cases, a motivation on the part of people to pursue something for reasons other than possibly the protection of the district or protection of the residents. Why wouldn't that be majority as opposed to consensus? Because those are, like I said, one individual can more than enough, whereas in all other instances, not more than enough, force the pursuit of it. In all other instances, it's a vote of council, in some cases, a vote of 2/3 of council, but having consensus there makes it, in my mind, potentially unwieldy. So, like I said, kind of a shotgun thing. Councillor Savage.
Thank you. Yeah, I've got a question on the modified policy at page 4, the 7th bullet down, which is below the highlighted one.
Yes.
I wonder whether staff could just, I think I know myself, but I would like clarification on the difference between a standing committee and a select committee.
And that was outlined for us previously, so I could provide you with that information. If I could so at the next meeting for clarification.
Okay. Actually, when the resolution table this.
I believe the standing committee, I believe the standing committee refers to the legislation where it says that the mayor may establish standing committees. So that was the basis behind that. Select committee is more, as I say, hand-selected and possibly a representation, a mediator or a member of legal counsel facilitating that. And the select committee has the ability, as our legal counsel has pointed out, to inquire into the matter of what talks about, the procedural affair officer under the inquiry, and they have special abilities to subpoena witnesses and documents and have that as their own swearing declarations.
Just a question with regards to minutes. Have notes been taken about
Yes,
comments?
yes. Yeah. Oh, no, I didn't. I'm sorry.
Councillor Mulder.
Just, again, following up on some of the comments that have been made, I agree with the mayor's comment about moving the statement to attempt to resolve the matter without proceeding to the steps set out in section 7 of this policy. I agree that it would be worthwhile to move that particular bullet, which is on page 4, up closer to the top of the list. I suggest immediately behind the first bullet, the corporate officer must place. With respect to the facts required in the allegation, I think it's gonna vary from situation to situation, but I think it would be useful to have a change indicating, as much factual foundation as possible. I'm not quite sure where that would fit in. I also agree with the mayor's comments about the use of the word consensus, although it sounds really nice. It may not be appropriate in a given situation, so it may be worthwhile to just drop our expectations there. And then lastly, with respect to indemnification and costs, I'm opposed to that one. I think it would have a chilling effect on the willingness of the district to proceed with it. I can say that it's extremely common for individual council members in other scenarios to have to pay their own legal costs. In the world of litigation generally, this is something that people always find a little bit surprising. You don't get paid your legal costs until you win a lawsuit. So you could be going through, a year of litigation, 2 years of litigation, 3 years of litigation, and then if you win, then you get paid your legal costs. And even then, you only get 30 to 50% of what your legal costs are. And I don't know why, that's always a surprise to people, and I don't think that the district should be making any indemnifications here. Although my primary reason is for the chilling effect that I mentioned. I think that we should be, I think that we should deal with these in the appropriate fashion when they come up, and the legal costs that are incurred either by the district or for the individual should be treated essentially as a cost of doing business and the cost of doing it appropriately. Finally, with respect to the indemnification, I think that the choice is there for a person whether or not they want to retain legal counsel. It's not necessary; they don't have to. Those are the kinds of choices that individuals in all walks of life, in their employment and in their business dealings and in every other aspect of their life, have to make. So for that reason, I don't think that should be in there, but there's certainly been some good comments, and it appears that it may be useful to table this until the next meeting so we can integrate those.
Councillor.
I was gonna say, yes, I agree, the mayor had a lot of good comments, which I'd like to see incorporated, and then brought back. The issue about indemnification, I think is a very valid point, and it should be in there. As much as we say we want to protect the district, we also have to think about fairness to the person who may be unfairly accused and gets attacked by an aggressive counsel or a bias, who knows? But basically, I think to also have restraint on counsel to not be too over the top and pursuing an individual, it's good to have a balance. And then it makes counsel step back before they pursue these allegations that may be unfounded, and think about legal costs, because we could be on the hook at the same issue as the poor counselor that got on the hook. So I think that the point should be in there. And, you know, it goes back to when is a person considered guilty? You know, they're convicted and until they're proven guilty in my mind. So we should be covering it. If something were to happen, you never know. I think counsel should be looking to be responsible for the costs if it's proven to be false and unfounded. And especially if we're saying this is going to be a policy that is one that everyone in the province looks at, because no other jurisdiction in the province has this type of policy, except for us now. We want to make it a good policy, so let's do it. You know, let's do it right, and let's make it complete.
Just one last comment from myself, revolves around that chilling effect. The ability of people to run for council is not based or should not be based on financial ability. I could see instances where people have limited financial resources if they were on council, potentially accepting unfounded allegations because they don't have the ability to fight against it, might be the best way to describe it. The cost of doing business side of things, that applies to the district as well. And in terms of resources, we've seen from reserves and surpluses and things like that, the ability of the district to pursue something in a legal type scenario is beyond what an individual resident is. And this goes back to some of the slap lawsuits type approach, where the big corporate puts a lawsuit against an individual who can't defend themselves. So in terms of the indemnification side of things, I believe it's important for that individual to have the opportunity to defend themselves in that respect. And agree the idea of getting independent legal opinion is an important thing, but in terms of the cost, recognizing $766, just the ability to pursue it in the issue of reform is so limited. I worry about that in that case. And if it's a well-founded allegation, then in that respect there, the district itself should have nothing to worry about.
Do you want a motion to refer this back?
Well, we've got a couple things. Technically, there's a motion on the floor itself. We could table it till staff comes back with recommendations as to potential changes based on the comments tonight. Councillor Miller?
I'll make a motion to table until I'll accept staff's recommendation there. What would you like?
Just appreciating our legal counsel schedule. We'll try to get it back to council as quickly as we can, but it may be challenging for March 23rd. We may need to go to April 11th.
To table it until April 11th.
Okay. Second by Councillor Negri. All those in favor of the motion? Thank you. Motion carried. Which gets us to new business. ABICC attendance April the 10th to 12th, 2015. You know, the reduction in conventions line on the budget. So,
Sorry, this is coming just based on previous direction from council. The budget's been reduced. What was initially in there was approximately $29,000 or $100 and some. So with the $10,000 deducted, you have $19,500 that remains. Keep in mind, 2014 actuals were lower, but ABICC was in Kirksville last year, so there were significant costs related to travel and accommodations.
okay, I guess the biggest question to council members is anybody available or intending to attend ABICC? Councillor Bowman?
I did miss the last ABICC, so I'd be reluctant to miss this one. I'm sure when it moves down the line, I will be volunteering not to attend. But for this year, I hope that it's a possibility for me to attend.
Councillor Haynes?
I didn't attend UBCM, and I only attended one day at the last ABICC. But I'm gonna pass, just because I'm too darn busy. It's really tough time.
Okay. Other council members, Councillor Paulson?
Yeah, I'm gonna pass too, as I look through the program, some interesting topics, but I don't really see the value to that, so with the topics presented here. Had my fill of networking up at the LGLA sessions for now, so I would take a pass, thank you.
Okay. Councillor Savage?
Yeah, I'm available to go if council decides to nominate.
Councillor Negrave?
I will not be attending. Thank you.
Okay. For myself, when it comes to the ABICC side of things, as mentioned, the agenda itself relatively limited in terms of its offerings. I would prefer that budget be saved for the UBCM, so we can make sure that people are given the opportunity in that respect. So I wouldn't be attending the ABICC. So that leaves two individuals available and willing. So
Councillor Scott?
He didn't express one way or the other his interest to staff them. You can ask him.
Well, we could make the motion to include Councillor Scott if council wishes, and then if he chooses not to, then that's fine. It's council's wish. Okay, so we make a motion.
I move that we send Councillor Savage, Councillor Milbank, and Councillor Scott to ABICC.
Authorized.
Authorized.
Okay. We have a seconder for that? Okay, Councillor Coulson, discussion. Okay, Councillor Miller?
I don't know how we're gonna proceed with doing this, but, I don't mind for this evening, but I've got, we may end up with a little bit of concern if, I can see the possibility where, some councillors get picked on and get deprived of opportunities that they think would be good learning opportunities or valuable to the district. So my preference would be if we just did it by volunteering, and I'm not sure if we can skip the council authorization component of it. I think that it would probably work itself out, but.
Councillor Savage?
Yeah, I do think it's important that we send representation, we contribute to ABICC. And I think probably a strategy might be to send 3 or 4 councillors to one and the other 3 councillors to the other in terms of UBC and ABICC.
Now, recognize that in terms of that kind of process, sometimes, if there's 3 people that want to be ACC, but okay, your time's up and therefore we consider UBCM, maybe you're not available, and hope that we have the flexibility of adapting. Councillor Milman?
I think my preference would be to rotate it and then have people assigned in advance. And then, if among us we find that we are less interested in going to one or more interested in going to another, we can sort of put our spot back into the pool and give somebody else the opportunity. I just want to make sure that it stays fair. I think that there's always the potential risk that, because somebody's rubbed somebody the wrong way, that they'll get, isolated and alienated and not given the opportunity to get same kind of knowledge as other people.
Any further discussion on the motion? Hearing none, all those in favor? Opposed, motion carried. Asset management grant application. Basically, we're looking to submit an application for the planning program for developing the asset management strategy.
I move that council direct staff to proceed with submitting an application to the 2015 Asset Management Planning Program for the development of an asset management strategy, including an appraisal of district capital assets consistent with the district's asset management policy, and further that periodic reporting provided to council with regard to the management of the grant funds.
Second by Councillor Savage. Discussion? Councillor Paulson.
Periodic reporting. I prefer to see like a timeline, a number associated with that. Is that quarterly, monthly? Periodic reporting doesn't really say much.
We can include it in the quarterly report that the finance officer does.
Any further discussion?
Should we amend that then?
If you want it to be specific, yes.
So would that be considered an amending motion or a friendly amendment or how?
Could do an actual motion. We haven't done it.
So that would be an amending motion to reword the motion previously put forward. So right to the end and further that quarterly reporting will be provided to council with regard to the management of the grant funds.
Okay, do we have a second for that motion? Councillor Newgray, discussion on the amendment. Hearing none, all those in favor? Opposed, motion carried. Original motion as amended. Any further discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor? Opposed, motion carried. Okay, which gets us to the public participation.
Whoops, Fire Chief. I just don't want to mislead when I mentioned 5 years. This Councillor Milbank's discussion there. Obviously, the things you're concerned with most are the engines and fire protection apparatus. Those are a little further out, perhaps, unless major development happens, and we need to look at some aerial apparatus or something before our next line engine comes due. But having said the 5 years, there's certainly the rescue truck that could be looked at, and the duty truck, 2019 will be 10 years old. I think that's going to be as long as it needs to hang around, but that is a small expense. So just to clarify what I indicated, that's all.
Okay. Thank you, Chief Witts. Further public participation.
Ms. White, with regards to the taping, that seems to have a big debate. If it gets more people to know what you're doing, it's got to be good. In a way, I mean, I know it's one is a little bit shy about having hundreds of people listening to what you're saying and seeing you. But I know somebody actually that did go on your site and said, by the way, I really enjoyed looking at what you're doing. And if it gets people involved, then it's a sign of the times.
Councillor Melvin?
My concern wasn't with taping it. I'm wholeheartedly in favor of taping it.
I think it got knocked, so I don't think any of you on camera.
My concern is it being posted on a private YouTube site, in particular, if there's there's no formalized district control over the comments.
But do you not have a web page?
The district?
Yes.
Yes, that's where I would like
That's
it.
where it should be.
The ability to, recognizing the size of the files, the ability for it to be included with the district webpage, I suspect is probably limited based on the requirements on bandwidth, et cetera.
What we would do is incorporate the link from our website to the YouTube site, the same as a news post. But then it would be from the district's site, and it would be controlled by the district.
And other people could link to it on their various sites.
But not edited.
Well, not with the current setup. Most response have other means of broadcasting their web streaming. It's a different process.
Councillor Henry.
It would be the same thing, it's just coming from one site versus another, it's still the same end product.
Sometimes it's very difficult to email a council member. I don't know about you guys. I tried to do it to the mayor and everything I tried to do was rejected. Every word, and I mean it was just a suggestion. Anyway, second thing is, I haven't had a log. Is it not in operation?
Currently, it's looking for an editor.
Oh, I'm sad I don't look at that. signage is still not. Planters are not producing, well, one planter is beautiful, the rest are full of. And it would be really nice to have a district rubbish bin. And also to have them by the bus stops. If you give people the opportunity to drop things in containers, they might actually prefer it. Yes.
Councillor Nolan?
It's, rubbish bins are specifically identified in the village core plan, so they do.
Yes, but it seems to take so long to get things done.
Yeah, just put one out there.
Yeah, just put get a kid to paint on it.
That's in there too.
Yeah.
But, you know, we've had the core thingy for how long?
18 months.
Yeah, but you know, it'd be so simple, just.
We don't need a core.
Thank you very much.
Okay, I'm done.
Any further participation? Okay, can somebody make the motion to go in?
Oh, have fun.
I move that council will do committee of the public pursuant to sections 919, subsection 1A and F of the community charter. For the purpose of considering law enforcement, the council considers that disclosure could reasonably be expected to harm the conduct of an investigation under or enforcement of an enactment, and personal information of an identifiable individual who holds or is being considered as an officer, employer, agent in the municipality, or another position appointed by the municipality.
Okay, second by Councillor Savage. All